So cultural agility for you, it was a very personal experience from when you started and you moved forward because you really understood the power of culture, and I imagine along the way there was so much for you to learn and adjust to, and then coming back. And from your point of view, cultural agility is really the way to focus on this. This is how you um, really work internationally. This is how we kind of get along, even just thinking about the cultural differences that we have anywhere, even just locally, there's going to be cultural differences. It's almost like the key to collaboration. Why do you see it so much about cultural agility? As opposed to, say, for example, unconscious bias training, or the other ways that people might like think
And what
about.
is cultural agility?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You
yeah.
know what? That's a much better way to ask that question. I could
Thank
just
you,
say
Jeff.
simply, what is cultural agility? Thank you,
Yeah,
Dan.
I can start with that, but I want to answer the unconscious bias training question too, because it's cultural agility is really the ability to comfortably and effectively work in different countries and with people from different cultures. But culture is really nothing more than however we've been socialized as individuals. So, you think about all the layers of socialization, our family, our education, our profession, our faith, our, where in the country or in the world we've lived. All of these are kind of socializing elements that enable us to see the world through, our limbic systems, our initial responses to how we observe each other and also the situations that we walk into. I am not a fan of unconscious bias training, and I'm so sorry, but what we see in research is that what unconscious bias training is doing is essentially just it's heightening everyone's awareness of their limbic processors, which is great. So we all have knee-jerk reactions based on the data we've been collecting our entire lives. But what it's not doing effectively is it's not telling us how to override that and how to actually use our brains, our prefrontal cortex, to really have these authentic and real conversations with one another. So all of that, is okay. My fear with unconscious bias training, what it's doing is it keeps flagging for people what their quote unquote, I hate the phrase, but biases are. And in doing so, it's stopping those organic and authentic conversations that we would normally embrace having with one another. So sorry, that was a really winded answer for what it is and why it's different.
I think it was shorter than the question, the way I asked it, but the well, so it basically you're like charting a path forward, and this is something that we see with people out there doing really good work about building more empathy and understanding about the differences, and they could be generational, they could be gender, they could be race. There's all kinds of things in addition to different nationalities. But then people, what ends up happening is they get afraid to talk to each other. They don't know how to interact anymore, and so you're presenting a path forward to like, yeah, let's recognize these differences, but here's how we can now move forward and actually work together. Could you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what your recommendations are?
Sure. So, Darren, what you described, all that wonderful training that kind of understanding generational differences and national differences and professional differences, gender, whatever those differences might be, that's actually one part of cultural agility. Our brains have to be aware that something could potentially be different, right?
Mhm.
We have to know, we have to be sort of signaled to have that opportunity to see a difference. But then there's the other piece of it. It's that now what do you do with that, right? And what we're finding, and the reason I wrote the Cultural Agility book, is that individuals who have a set of competencies tend to be able to read that environment, read that interaction, read that situation accurately, and respond as needed. And those competencies are things like tolerance of ambiguity, resilience, because you're going to make some mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Perspective taking, humility, curiosity, relationship building. Those are those critical competencies that enable us to be great anywhere, whether you're a pharmaceutical sales rep selling to a foreign-born healthcare provider, or if you're a Peace Corps volunteer working in another country. It doesn't matter. It's always about that ability to go into a situation, recognize that something could be different in the way you establish trust, build credibility, communicate, and then use those competencies in order to really, do the best in those situations.
I got to follow. So that sounds really interesting. I'd love to get into some of the ways that you break up the differences too, because you could talk about self-management, relationship management, and task management, which I think is interesting. But let me just see if I got this right, because the idea with a bias is that it's, I'm a cognitive miser, so my brain has to work this way, that I have these things that just happen unconsciously. And that's part of the deal. But what you're talking about in terms of these competencies that you develop, do you try to train them so that they become automatic, like a tonic for the biases that you might have, or do you use it like you're always sort of bringing it to your prefrontal cortex and just like, here's my checklist, remember to do the checklist?
Yeah, it's a teeny bit of both. So what we do, you're absolutely right. What we do is we train on each of those competencies. So if you think about each of those competencies kind of has its own recipe. Some of it is how your body's wired, how your body's handle serotonin and dopamine and the like. And then a good portion of each competency is really skills that you can learn and build and develop and gain in order to move the needle on any given competence, whether it's tolerance, ambiguity, resilience, perspective taking. All of them have this formula, if you will. I mean, everybody kind of is a little bit different in how they sort of mix the ingredients, but those are the ingredients. So to some extent, it is just straight out building the competencies, because once you kind of build up those, you can go into situations realizing that you're going to judge a situation instinctively. We all do, right? In a fraction of a second. But when you have those competencies, you're able to do things like, let's take tolerance of ambiguity. Tolerance of ambiguity enables you to linger longer in a state of uncertainty. So rather than making these reflexive, subjective impressions, it enables, having that competency enables you to go into a situation and realize you don't have information. Humility enables you to go into a situation and say, look, no matter how brilliant I am as a chemist, IT professional, a journalist, a professor, whatever, you need to learn how to do it there. So it enables you to go into a situation, and rather than reflexively sort of reacting to students or clients or lab mates or whatever in a certain way, you're willing to say, I need to learn how to do it here. So each one of those competencies has a role in enabling people to learn how to kind of override those reflective responses and those subjective impressions.
Yeah, that's great.
I was when I was researching a little bit for our conversation today, I heard you speaking about the importance of, like you said, holding back judgment, right? And also the importance of building trust and empathy as part of the competencies. And that's a question we get asked a lot. Where do we start if we want to build a better culture or whatever we want to do? Where would you recommend a team leader start in building trust with his or her team?
Yeah, well, trust is interesting because even the construct is kind of culturally bound, and meaning that we each kind of evaluate whether we're going to trust someone in a slightly different way. So just in a work context, some people trust based on competence. Show me you're really good at what you do, and I'll trust that I can work with you because I trust that you'll do what you say you're going to do, or that you're dependable or reliable. Other people, trust comes on sort of that interpersonal sense. Become my friend. Let's connect. Let's tell me about your family, your life, your background, and then we can work together because now I trust you as a person. So if I were a team leader going into a multicultural team, and this is usually the advice we have to give to multicultural team leaders, is you have to assume all of those are true. So you have to spend some time get credentializing everyone, giving everybody each other's credibility. At the same time, leaving some space and some room for getting to know one another. We have a few tools that we use to help team leaders do that a little more efficiently. But yeah, it's kind of the recognizing that it's not one size fits all. And then the other part is just leaving some space for the team to operate effectively and understanding that their styles will be different and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a learned alumni who is leading a team, Salesforce actually, out in Europe. and she has team members and team leads in Italy, France, all different European countries, and she said it's incredible how the cultural differences in each one, and so she's trying to learn. She asked me, she said she's trying to learn. Sarah, she said, just trying to learn how to deal with each different region has been incredibly challenging and a great learning opportunity for her. It's all different everywhere she goes for the first time.
And it's impressive. I mean, kudos to her that she's recognizing that she can't be the same leader exactly the same way. That's actually why when I coined the phrase cultural agility, that's why I called it agility, right? It's you have to change your form without losing your balance.
One of the questions we get sometimes is essentially like, how do I know? So if I'm a new leader and you're my team. So Damon, are you more task-based trust or relationship-based trust? And how do you actually find out across these different dimensions the ways that people might be different?
Yeah. So I mean, we do some assessments ahead of time that when I had said, this is a way to shortcut for leaders like your colleague, we have some assessments that enable them to sort of see their team on a grid and actually see kind of where everyone is and how they might differ. So there's some assessments you could do. There's also some kind of logical questions, like, hey, tell me about people who trusted in the past. And
yeah.
We can add it to the show notes. Are the assessments online? They go to your website and find them, or contact you directly for that?
Yeah, in fact, they're free. So that's the other benefit. We're a public benefit corporation, and Skillify, as you named. And one of the goals was to try to get this content out there as broadly as possible. So we can get a lot of great information for free.
It's brilliant. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for sure.
Have to on my guide, but I can send you that.
Good. One of the challenges that we have when it comes to teaching people things like humility or empathy is I mean, we work on these things and people want to get better at them, but it's a little hard to know how to make it actionable. As opposed to if somebody wants to be a better coach, we could, here's specific questions you could ask, for example. Or if you want to get better at giving feedback, here's a formula you could follow. But if you want to get better at humility or empathy, what do you do?
Right. So we use this exercise, because there's usually of the ones I'll name, there's usually one that's tougher than others for each person, and that's one they have to work on. So they have to work on praising others, work on learning from others, especially people who you perceive to be more junior than you, and then learn to appreciate others. And it's fascinating when I do this with our executives, whether I'm doing it with executives or my college juniors, right? Everyone has this part that they'll say, oh yeah, it was no problem praising, but I just had a hard time thanking. It was like I was giving up kind of some of my ownership of what I've accomplished, or they had no problem thanking and praising, but asking for help, man, I just can't do it. So what we find is that individuals who can exhibit all three of those behaviors, they tend to be able to go into a situation and ask for help comfortably, understand that other people have information they don't, and that they can do a lot of things that are beneficial for building humility.
And those three, again, were asking for help, praising, and thanking?
Yes. Yeah, those are the exercises I've always used, and they seem to work pretty well in helping people identify sort of where they need to work.
Let's test it out right now. Asking for help, praising, and thanking. Which one is hardest for you? I'll go with asking for help would be the hardest one for me of those three.
I can definitely praise. I could definitely thank. Asking for help, and we had started the session with what do I need to learn? It's asking for help from my students. How do you want to do this? Professor, we can do it for you. This is easy. And then they're like, next thing you know, I've learned. But I mean, it's that kind of having to drop down your guard and say, I just have no clue how to do this.
Yeah. Damon, your turn.
I would say maybe it's thanking only because you could lose sight of how important it is to do that. I
Yeah.
personally, Darren, you know this, I like to ask for help. You know, I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
you don't need to recreate the wheel, and it's okay to show vulnerability on it. But sometimes, you know, I would go with thanking might be something that I got to continue to keep in top of mind.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because actually my feeling is that you're pretty good at that. In fact, my guess is that we're actually probably pretty good at all of these. But that brings up that point, is that sometimes you can't tell. Like, you might feel genuinely like you really might feel good about those things, but are not necessarily being perceived that way. So that, of course, is part of the deal, right?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because humility does have two parts, right? It's how you feel. Like, you can feel really humble, like you're walking into every situation with this, heart of humility and mindset of humility. But it's how are you coming up to others
Yeah.
in that context, and that's really different depending on generational, cultural, whatever it may be. So it's kind of
Yeah.
learning the right behaviors to appear that way as well.
We talk about this thing sometimes. This is a really silly example, but when you are presented with an idea that's a compelling idea and it's really got you thinking, it's pretty common to frown. But frowning looks often like you're being critical. And especially if you're in a senior role and you're frowning at an idea, people could perceive it as like, well, you don't like the idea. So it's that recommendation to, like, even though it's not great for you, the generous thing is to actually kind of learn not to frown when you.
Yeah. Same thing with smiles. I mean, smiles have a hugely different impression around the world. And I grew up, I mean, think about socialization, right? I grew up as a little girl. If I wasn't smiling, my mom and dad would say, "What's wrong? What's wrong?"
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
my default look is a smile.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when I started working internationally, I realized that was I was like kind of coming off as a little crazy.
Right. Especially because we show teeth in America. There's a lot of teeth in America that you see.
We're big on our teeth, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyhow, it was actually a moment of humility where I kind of did have to sort of relearn the role of a smile. And
Yeah. Nice.
yeah.
So this leads me to something. Well, it's probably just me, but I'm dying to ask you this question because you have such a great, really researched, solid academic background in understanding this, as well as out in the world lived experience. So you really understand what you're talking about. So much of the kind of soft skills training that we came from American universities, where we did the psychological testing on students who could afford to be at those universities. And you have that whole weird phenomena, which is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, that kind of slants all of our perspective on this. So what are your thoughts about there being kind of a Western bias to understanding cultural differences and soft skills training throughout the world?
Yeah, such a good point, Aaron. And boy, I mean, we could almost spend hours just talking about this. What I began with is kind of what I rely on. So my initial research was on dispositional traits, so personality traits, big five, right? Personality is universal, and it behaviors will kind of emerge somewhat culturally specific, but in terms of personality traits, we're all kind of wired in terms of how our bodies handle things like serotonin, dopamine, and the like.
Yeah.
And those kind of genetic differences, if you will bubble up and kind of mix and mingle with sort of early life experiences that kind of form our personality traits that are relatively stable. Almost all of the work I do starts from there, because I wanted to, for exactly the reason you named, I wanted to do the things that would work everywhere or be relevant everywhere. So now when I do research, it is with individuals all over the world, with in terms of people who are taking assessments. They're not just from U.S. schools, but they're individuals of all ages, all around the world, all SES, and really trying to make sure that things aren't tilting toward one group or another. And I do my best whenever I'm in talks like these to sort of flag where I think there are kind of cultural differences. Even like the humility example, there are some ways that plays out differently in different cultures, and we have to be aware of that. So
Yeah.
I do my best. I started on what was core to all of us, and then do my best to try to flag wherever I know that something might be specific.
Yeah. It's great. You seem to be so curious. And I know, Damon, we talk about curiosity as like one of those core things that you really need to embrace and develop. Did that? Oh, that did make it. That's one of your 3 self-management competencies, curiosity, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So curiosity, you think about, if you don't go into a new and novel situation with a heart of curiosity, I mean, it's like your flashlight in a dark room. How else are you going to learn about
Yeah.
the context that you're in? How else are you going to learn how things
Yeah.
are done, or what could be different, or how you're appearing? There's so many reasons it's important. Um, yeah. So curiosity is important.
Good one to develop.
How has all of this changed with the increase in remote work from the pandemic? You said, has it improved, or has it made it worse? Because like you said, in the past, sure, we had remote Zoom meetings or team meetings, but you were also in person a lot of times with those different cultures. Now, the majority of this still is remote since the pandemic. So has it made it worse or better, or what are your thoughts on cultural agility remote?
Yeah, it's made it so it kind of both. It's made it easier, right? We don't have to get on a plane to go to a meeting. So in that way, it's made it easier. But in terms of the cultural issues, it's made it harder because we have fewer cues to sort of clue in on. We have just what we see on a little screen. We don't leave any time at all to get to know one another. So we're sort of removing all of the ways that we become interconnected and build trust and credibility. So we're efficient. So if the task is one that we just need to be exchanging information or content knowledge, great, this is the way to do it. But if it's really building and establishing long-term trust, we're losing a lot of the cultural cues that we would have normally had if we were in person. So I think we're losing some, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to turn around this virtual thing. And I think a lot of people love the flexibility of it. I just hope that now we start to get a little bit better at picking up on cultural differences that can happen in the small screen. I keep doing the Zoom thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking of that because, like you said, I mean, it requires you to get even more curious when you're on these Zoom calls to try to pick up those cues, because they're not as readily there for you as they would be if you were in person.
Yeah. It's
Super.
it's unfortunate. I have a feeling that we're in the roles and jobs where trust is critical for success, for effectiveness, for wealth creation, whenever trust is central and core, like it can't happen without it. I have a feeling that face-to-face will come back. I think there's going to be a lot.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer when it comes to trust and all of that. To really, for the newer generations coming into the workforce, it will be hard, I think, to become a great leader if you don't have some of these face-to-face interactions and these learning opportunities as well. So remote is great, but I think that there is definitely a need for face-to-face when possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paula, in addition to cultural agility, you are also an expert on essentially like career advice, like how to build a career in a holistic sense about building and managing a career over lifetime. You have your book, Live for a Living. And could you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts when it comes to building a good career?
Yeah. So the premise of Live for a Living is really about self-management of one's career. I think too often we see, at the university, we see students like running to get into the university, and then working really hard to get that first job. And then everybody kind of gets really passive in the sense that they then wait for their HR department to say, hey, we want you for the next role, or their manager to say, we're going to move you over there, or a headhunter to call to say, yep, here we go. We're going to encourage you to get to the next role. What people sort of forget is that in each of those examples, your skills and abilities are benefiting the client organization or your employer. It's not necessarily the next right move for you, although it is flattering, right? So I'm trying to sort of take out the don't be so flattered by being, asked to be in a role, but rather really think about you keep owning it. What's the next step that you need in order to keep moving you towards something you view as ideal? And so we spent kind of the front end of the book really talking about how to create or how to identify what would be ideal, and then sort of the middle of the book kind of talking about how to move yourself and own your career all the way through, and then at the end it's kind of how do you integrate each stage with life priorities, your family, your non-work hobbies, like.
That sounds great.
What advice do you have for somebody that maybe it's really not their choice? Maybe they were let go and they've decided now is the time that I need to make a career pivot and go in a different direction, but maybe don't have they're a little nervous to make that pivot. What advice do you have for them based off of the skills that they had going into what they've learned in their previous experiences?
Yeah, I would say it's really, take some time, just really do the hard work, take the time and really try to understand yourself. So many people they don't understand what their natural talents and gifts are. They don't understand necessarily how they best, like what are the contexts, what are the situations in which they best will work their best? Where do they find a sense of flow? And then the other, like, what don't they like? So oftentimes we end up keep repeating what feels familiar in the construct of work, as opposed to sort of configuring a lot of self-information into what would be sort of ideal for us. When people start doing that, they start making decisions that surprise others. Like, my co-author, Andy, talks about making a pretty significant pivot. Everybody expected him to go into like post business school after his MBA. They expected him to go a certain way, and he went into a much smaller firm doing something that was true to him. When I came out with my PhD, I had a job offer at one of these top business school MBA programs, and I opted to go to a public university doing something else because it was a better fit. When you start making those types of fit choices, you might not make the choice that's the most logical to the outside world, but it's the right one for you. So that was a long way to say one piece of advice, but
yeah. I think honestly, I think it's a great answer though, because what I hear you saying is don't always go with what you're familiar with, and maybe even reflect on what you feel like your strengths are or your passions that you want to do, and go in that direction.
Absolutely. And that's where we're going to, I think, see people find the greatest level of fulfillment in the careers that they choose.
I think defining what you're passionate about is interesting too, because there's also advice out there that like you can get hung up like with your passion as opposed to do what you're good at.
Right.
So how do you define, like,
they got to intersect?
Yeah. How does that intersect? And what, I guess I'm saying, like, what do you think about that advice? Just follow your passion.
Yeah. So I think it's a little short-sighted. I actually would start at a different spot, and that is to say, understand your work centrality. To what extent is a fulfilling career important to you? And we have to honor and respect that it's not all that important to some people. Like, it just like, I really don't care. I don't want to manage, some kind of big messy. I want to just have a nice paycheck that gets me to be able to, do the things I love with people I enjoy. And it's just it doesn't overlap. So we talk a lot about work centrality, work overlap, your career values, and really understanding those. Because once you understand sort of how much of yourself you want to give to this, then you can say, okay, well, if I really do get this great sense of fulfillment from this sense of accomplishment, some achievement, okay, now let's start talking about where do I want to go? How high, how far, how much do I want to reach? And then it's like, okay, well, what's my purpose? What's my interest? Sometimes the things you're passionate about, nobody wants to pay you for.
Right.
Sometimes the things that you're really gifted at, you don't want to do full time, or you just want to keep as a hobby. So it's kind of understanding like that toggle between what's needed out there relative to what you're good at and people will want to pay you to do. But it all begins with some self-awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If so the vision for Paula Caligari with cultural agility, the mission is to bring this out, and in your and through Skillify, you're sort of democratizing this opportunity to become more agile and create a fulfilling career. But in that vision sense, what would the world look like if people could really adopt more of this cultural agility mindset? Um,
Wow. Do you know, it's funny. I think it's just get kind of just stop with like sort of judging each other around demographic traits and just kind of realizing that we're all kind of embody the socializing agents that we were raised with and that we have experienced throughout our lives. And you know what? Each of us will have a different set of those, and we're all going to kind of come into this whatever conversation, situation, interaction with a different lens, and that's cool. That's okay. Like
yeah,
it's okay. It's
yeah,
okay. Like
yeah,
everybody just breathe it through. We're all a little different. And you
yeah,
know what? It's okay. We can have those conversations and really just respect one another. So maybe if I had sort of the like, wow, what would it all look like if this really worked and worked in a kind of a universal way? I think it'd just be respect, That
yeah.
can all be the same, but we can be respectful.
Sounds good. I'd like to live in that world.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, it is kind of a weird balance, right? Because you're talking about balancing both that we have differences and then we have things that are similar and being able to live with those kind of opposites at the same time.
Yeah, and it's funny that the from a task perspective. So since a lot of your listeners and viewers are leaders, we also have to think about we're asking people to do different things with that knowledge. Once you see the difference, right? One of the
Mhm.
things we talk about with cultural agility is what do you do with that? So in
Yeah.
some cases, what you're doing is adapting, like your colleague who had to adapt her leadership style given the different context she was in. But there's sometimes you have to minimize it. So people who are in safety or production or quality assurance or ethics, there's a whole lot of non-negotiables going on there. And it's like, look,
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it that you see this differently, but you know what? We have a regulation here, or we have a rule
Yeah.
here, or we have a whatever. I'm going to have to kind of convince you, motivate you, persuade you to do
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
in a different way. And then there's this third way, and that's the look at it's not going to be my way, which is this way, and it's not going to be your way, which is that way, or that other person. Like it's going to be this thing, and we're going to create this new culture dynamic. It could be the team, it could be us
Yeah.
working together, but it's going to be unique to us. Our team's not going to look like that team. We're going to create our own culture. And what
Yeah.
we're finding in the research is that great leaders are able to understand when to pull which of those three levers, when to adapt, when to minimize, when to integrate. And
Yeah.
they can do it all effectively. So they can read the situation and like pull which one is needed at a given time. That's when it becomes, that's when you start to see them, really flourish in any environment.
I love that you brought that up. You talked about it a little bit. I've heard you talk about it before, this idea that it's not always that you just embrace every single cultural difference. Sometimes you need to push back. And the three levers is a great way to understand a
Yeah.
process by which we interact and collaborate with each other.
We're seeing a lot on the phrase adaptability now. Number one competency needed for the future. Number one, we keep hearing adaptability. When you start reading how it's being defined, they're actually not defining adaptability. They're defining this idea of agility, this idea that being able to read the environment and respond as needed.
Nice. Very nice.
Can you share an example of an organization that you think does this really well, that's able to shift and adapt their culture?
Well, I can tell you, because I worked at Oracle for 10 years, that is such an adaptable culture at Oracle. I mean, there's a company that's been around for decades in the technology industry. And when I was there in, let's say must have been 2014, 15. This is when Oracle did the biggest shift in its culture of all time, moving from an on-prem company to a cloud company. And they hired a guy named Sean Price to come in and help them. His mission was to create a cloud company out of an organization that had non-cloud DNA. At the time, it was only 5% of their revenue coming from the cloud. Today it's 70%, right? So they were successful in shifting. But moving from on-prem to the cloud, which so many different organizations are dealing with now, even non-tech organizations are dealing with it, it requires not just a new product focus, it's a new business model, it's a new customer, it's a new way of thinking about the solution and the way, new language. I mean, it's so wildly different and impacts every level of the business. And so Oracle was expert in that, but they had a lot of experience because where they got the practice, they have an acquisition strategy. So they're constantly acquiring companies, huge companies, small companies, and some of them they throw into quote unquote big Oracle, right? They just kind of immerse into the larger organization, and some remain as entities whole within the larger organization, and some have very different cultures and some have very similar cultures. And so the ability to shift in response to how the organization is organically growing has become somewhat of a superpower.
I got a couple questions here. One, how does that process work? And my second question is, like, if they say, "Hey, we want to be like this," I assume you also come in and say, "Look, you may think you want to get to be that, but that's not exactly what you need. Let me show you how or what you actually should strive to be as a culture."
Most of the clients that come to us, they're already culture focused organizations, right? Companies that are toxic and broken and uninterested in creating a thriving workplace don't hire us because they would have to spend money on culture, right? So we don't get a lot of totally dysfunctional organizations. What we get is people who say, "We're here and we want to be here, and we think that culture is the strategic lever that we can pull to get that done." And we work with government organizations, we work with Fortune 10 organizations, and we work with mid-market businesses. But ultimately, all of them have the same formula that we apply. We call it the culture equation. And the formula is, what's your purpose? Because we do start with purpose. What's your strategy? Your purpose is your why. Your strategy is your how, right? And then what particular culture will you need in order to amplify and drive that strategy and that purpose to get results? And culture is ultimately the way that you get things done. So we help them memorialize it first. We get them to be explicit about it. Earlier, I was saying you've got to be really clear on what the results are. You have to be really clear on what the beliefs are. You need to penetrate that and cascade it throughout the business so everyone knows what that is. Because if they don't know what it is, it's like zip is this. It is as if it didn't exist for them, right? And then you consistently, through the actions of leaders and frontline employees, bring those top of mind and recognize people who live those beliefs to drive results. You give feedback to people who aren't. You tell stories about where it's happening. And then you evaluate systems, right? Because not everything is about how we show up for each other. If I work at an organization that's trying to drive innovation and risk taking, but then it takes 8 signatures for me to spend $500, that's an experience that isn't necessarily one-on-one experience, but is rather something that drives a belief, which is, well, that cultural belief they're telling me isn't really true because if they did want to empower me, then I would have more permission to spend money. So you have to look at the systems, and the rituals, and the norms within your organization that reinforce the right experiences or the wrong experiences. And so we create culture champions within your organization that lead the way. You know, you think about there's a great book called Cascades by Greg Sittel about change management. And what he says is you do not want to create change in your organization with some big PR campaign that you're trying to push some kind of awareness campaign to get everyone on board with an idea and then hope it takes. If you really want to create fast paced change, start with a small group of people who are super excited about this change and let them run with it. And then they'll have a win that you can tell the story of. And then people will be attracted to that and you can pull them into the change rather than pushing it down. So that's essentially what we do with culture champions. We're getting a small group of people who are super jazzed about this idea to lead the way. Then we tell the story of how they're making a difference. And then people say, oh, we want some of that. And then it grows like wildfire within the organization.
I'm getting into details a little bit here, but are those culture champions, are they usually individuals from different divisions or different departments?
Yeah, must be, yeah. You wanna find the people who think of your company, right? Right now, if you send out a mass email to everyone and say, "We're looking for volunteers for the culture committee." Like, there's gonna be people that roll their eyes, and then there's going to be 10 or 20 of them that will say, "That's what I wanna do," do because 'cause they're passionate about that kinda thing. Start with those people. I mean, get the easy win, the low-hanging fruit. They're gonna be super jazzed about it, and when there is a roadblock or a problem or some kind of situation that would maybe halt their progress, those people are gonna be really excited about overcoming the challenge as opposed to the naysayers or the skeptics who you push this onto that says, "See, we knew it wouldn't work. There's a problem already," right? So you get those people to embrace it early on, and then they'll create the tipping point. That 10 to 20% comes from them.
I like the sound of what you do at culture partners because I mean, my organization, we're small. We're like 100 people, right? And I've always been big on culture. I even took our team out to Vegas to go to the whole Zappos culture tour. But we've brought in a lot of, over the years, culture experts, and they always start off with an assessment about like what you do so wrong all the time, right? And it's like, what are the bad things you have doing? And then they'll give me some binder about what a shitty leader or a shitty company learn it is, which is
Yeah, I think the culture consultants who do that binder of problems assessment at the beginning they are trying to find the upsell before they even know anything about you, right? So they're asking questions when they do these interviews that will highlight what's broken, like what's not working. How would you do it differently? What would you improve if you could, right? And so you're getting feedback, but ultimately the goal of that feedback is to create a larger SOW for the consultant, right? And so that doesn't work. It's lacks integrity in my opinion, and frankly, it's not effective either. It creates more political drama than it solves. So yeah, we don't do that. We start with results. We say what is it you're trying to achieve and what beliefs do your people need to hold that will help you achieve those big new results that you haven't achieved up until now. And it's aspirational, it's forward thinking, it doesn't go backwards and then bring up drama for no reason. It can drama can be resolved by talking about how do we need to be, right? As opposed to what didn't work in the past. It's same conversation, it's just a different lens.
without pointing fingers and you
Yeah,
could learn from the past, but you obviously I don't think you should live in the past.
right, exactly.
So let's kind of move on to, you wrote a great book called Unfairly Labeled about generational differences. And what are some of the biggest misconceptions of the generations, whether it's a Gen Z, millennial, or even a boomer?
Yeah, I mean, the greatest misconception is that we have personalities associated with each generation. I mean, the misconception is that that is a way to classify people's behavior, beliefs. That's whole thing is made up. So we have data that shows that young people are not less loyal to their employers. Young people do not adopt to technology at work faster than older people. Young people are not as entitled as they're made out to be. There's so many just in your face stereotypes about each generation, and when you actually dig into the data, there's plenty of data that will support those stereotypes, but there's also a lot of data that will deny those stereotypes, and really depends on who you're studying, how big the population is, the way you ask the question, who's sponsoring the research, right? So much data out there is done by companies that have an agenda that want to sell something and they want a narrative and they back into the research so that they can have the headline that they were hoping to have. So having said all that, the reality is everyone is unique. What makes our personality is the experiences that we had throughout our childhood, that determined the beliefs that we hold today, right? And those beliefs are changing and those experiences are changing as we continue to grow older. And so it's not the 20-year wide age bracket that you happen to have been born within. It's, did you have a mother in the home? Did you have a rural or an urban upbringing? Did you have a teacher that cared about you? Did you have an aunt that spoiled you? Did you have a dad that was an alcoholic? I mean, these are the things that make up our beliefs about, like, is it a good thing to shoplift or a bad thing to shoplift, right? And
Yeah.
those beliefs are going to drive our actions as adults. I'm either going to go shoplift or not, and then I'm going to get a result from that. I'm either going to go to prison or not, right? So the idea that 9/11 made millennials more patriotic or less patriotic, I've read an article about both of those, right? The idea that Vietnam completely changed everyone's thinking, it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It's lazy research, it's headline making, it's clickbait, and it's destructive in the workplace because then what happens is you believe the lies you've been told about each generation. And instead of getting to know the person that you're interacting with, you've already given them a whole personality in your head that is a bias that you hold, and it's ageist in a lot of cases. And it keeps you separate rather than actually coming together and seeing the person in front of you.
What's a piece of advice you have for individuals who have all these different news channels or all these different reports they're looking at that they should narrow in on what's right and what's completely fake?
As a leader, the only data that's really relevant for you is the data specific to your team. So to read an Inc. article or a Forbes article about what millennials want today, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna lead you down the wrong path. Or in that 10th out of 10 scenario, they're giving you tips that are good for everyone. 5 tips for managing your millennial employees, and they're usually just best practices for management. So it's not specific to millennials. They're just putting 5 tips, and it would be just as relevant for a baby boomer population, for example. So all of that clickbait stuff, I would just ignore. If I see an article that has the word millennial in it or Gen Z in it, I don't click it because I already know it's full of bias. So what I do want to know is, what does my population think about something? What moves them? And maybe I look at that through a generational lens. When I was at Oracle and we did the Oracle engagement survey, we did look at it through a generational lens to see, do the young people at Oracle have a different opinion than the older people at Oracle? And every generation had the same number one priority, which was career development. And popular knowledge at the time would have told us that baby boomers are not as interested in career development as millennials because they're already developed, right? And that's just not the case. That's not what we found with our population. So we stopped reading all of those books and those articles, and we just talked to our population to see what they need and what we could do to help grow them and our company.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to see that even the baby boomers care as much about career development as the younger generations. And I heard you speak about they also don't adapt technology less quickly as well, right? So it's like there's just all
Right.
these misconceptions of you know exactly.
Well, let me explain that because it might sound not right. What's true is that young people use technology more in their personal life than older people. And the way that they measure it is very interesting. Like the Pew Research Center, they don't say, "Do you use technology?" Because what does that mean? They'll ask very specific questions like, "Is your phone near your pillow when you sleep at night?" Right. And then you're more likely to say yes to that if you're younger than if you're older. So then people see that disparity and they think, oh, they're tech savvy, they're more techy, that's not the case. What we were looking at specifically is adoption of new technology at work. So, oh, we're going to use a new AI chatbot internally. What is the rate of adoption amongst our employees based on generation? It was the same rate across the board. So just because young people have their cell phone on their pillow doesn't mean that they're more embracing of technology at work. And that's the assumption that people will make. They leap to a conclusion that's unfair.
What advice or tips do you have for leaders that are working with multi generations, right? And they're saying, because I get asked this question sometimes, like, how do I deal with these young people, right? How do I deal with them? What do I do? They come across as entitled.
So the first thing is you have to check yourself. You got to figure out when your bias is influencing your interactions. And the easiest way to do that is to notice when you're uncomfortable. Because if you meet someone new, you got a new hire, you got a candidate interview that you're doing, and you feel uncomfortable about something, that's a red flag that you've got bias percolating there. And you want to double check yourself and ask the question, why am I uncomfortable right now? And maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's a frizzy hair thing, right? Because we can have bias about anything. Oh, that person's hair is frizzy. They're probably less organized. That's one that I have. I don't know why I think frizzy hair is less organized, but I used to have really frizzy hair and I always used to like what do you call it? Not dry. Flat iron it like crazy because I didn't want people to think that I was unorganized, which is just a
Interesting.
bizarre link in my head. Maybe I had an aunt with frizzy hair that was unorganized, but it's just in my subconscious, right? And so I would notice when I interviewed people with frizzy hair, I would get uncomfortable. And I thought, oh, look at that. That has nothing to do with this person. That has to do with my own beliefs. So you want to investigate discomfort as a way of checking yourself so that you cannot fall into the trap of your own biases, right? Your best thinking. And then ask questions. And the best questions you can ask are questions, feedback for yourself. So when you're working with people, say, what feedback do you have for me? And hearing feedback that they have for you not only will teach you about how you can be a better leader to that person, but it also helps you understand their lens of the world and how they see things.
I talk all the time about how there's a lot of talk around, giving feedback, but I really think the goal is for leaders is to be great at receiving feedback. I mean, it can be like rocket fuel for your own personal growth, and for getting your teams to trust you. So I think that that is such a critical point right there is to be open and to receiving feedback and being self-aware about how you do so. And when it comes to ageism, it's on the flip side too. I see it with older people. I was mentoring this one guy, he's a sales leader, and he immediately overlooked hiring somebody because they graduated from college in 1995. This guy was like 30 years old. He's like, this guy's much, much older.
Yeah, we did research on this last year too. We looked at the performance of organizations that had diversity in their leadership team compared to companies that had lack of diversity in their leadership team. Particularly, this was a lens through gender diversity that we were looking at. And companies that had at least 45 to 75% of their leadership roles filled by women way outperformed companies that had 20% or less of their leadership roles filled by women. So why would that be, right? Intuitively, I can tell you as a woman that if I work for an organization that has more women in leadership roles, I feel like I belong more because I see me in leadership and I know there's opportunity. I mean, I don't know a single woman out there that doesn't look at the about us page on a company website and immediately look for how many white men are there, and if it's all white men, then I'm like, got it, right? This is not a company for me because they just don't care about thinking differently. And I was just talking to the CEO of Thrive Market yesterday for my podcast, and he was fascinating because he was talking about he had this great idea about basically allowing creating accessibility to healthy food to people all over the country. It was like Whole Foods in an e-commerce world, right? And he went to 100 VC firms pitching the idea, and every single one rejected him. And his theory as to why was here's a bunch of rich guys that live walking distance, if not certainly driving distance to a Whole Foods in New York and LA and these city centers. And they probably don't do their own shopping. And they didn't see the need for it. They're like, well, if people want healthy food, they'll just go to Whole Foods. Why do e-commerce, right? He ended up getting all of his financing from health food influencers. They invested their measly funds that they had into his company. In the first year, he had been projecting in those VC pitches that they were gonna make $15 million in his first year. In his first year instead, they hit 30 million, doubled the projections that the VC guys were all laughing at him about. And then he went back to the VC guys and said, "Would you like to invest now?" And they were like, "Oh my goodness, yes." And he got much better terms and he got pick of the litter on who invested with him because he had proved the model. The reason they didn't see the opportunity is because they only saw the world their way. and they couldn't see it a different way, which has significant business impact. You're seeing that with the effectiveness of AI bots being designed by a bunch of white guys. And so there's a particular bias that exists in the product. I mean, it's so intuitive, and yet, just not everyone cares enough to make a difference in that way.
I interviewed a guy, a black guy named Elias Simpson. He's awesome. You should have him on your show. He's the CEO now of cart.com. And he said that a lot of times when he goes out and was looking for senior level jobs, he would look at like where the companies were located, and he'd say, well, obviously these are just all white areas. Like, why would I ever move my family here, and do things? And he said that if you happen to go about it exactly like you're saying, is like you just narrow your market much by not just looking at things. If you're only looking at things through your own lens, you're really, doing yourself a disservice.
Which reinforces the point you made about asking for feedback, because we all have our own lens, right? So that guy you talked to has his own lens, and I have my own lens, and you have yours. And so asking for feedback expands the perspectives that we're seeing about what's going on and allows us to have a richer perspective.
Yeah, asking for feedback and also making sure you're surrounded with a bunch of people who have different perspectives, who feel comfortable enough to give you feedback to begin with.
Yeah. And you can encourage that too. I mean, a lot of people, when they ask for feedback, they'll say, "Do you have any feedback for me?" And that's an easy no. If my boss asks me that, it's an easy no. Oh, no, no, you're doing great. But if you ask, "What feedback do you have for me?" It's kind of, now you've got to come up with something. And so encouraging that is really powerful.
I've got a couple more questions.
Sure.
This is just awesome. And I've heard this about NetApp too, where it is an organization where people put the company's needs before their own individual needs. How are you able to create an organization like that?
Go back to what I said. We wanted to create something that we'd be proud of the rest of our lives. That attracted a certain type of person. And I used to tell people, when you're in the right organization, you should feel like you came home. Not like, oh God, if I just change everything I believe in, I can fit in here. Like if your number one thing is, I'm going to make money, I don't care what I got to do, who I have to climb over, I'm going to be at the top of the heap. This isn't the place for you. That's not going to be respected. It's not going to be appreciated. It's not going to be rewarded. But if you're that person who likes to be on a team, and you like to create and build teams, you like to create and build relationships that are long-standing, this is a good place to do it. And for us to do that, one of the things about what we did for a living is we sold network storage. And right up front, we said that by definition means when something fails, no one knows whose fault it is. It's networked. And our competitors would say, look, that's bad stuff. If you buy it all from me, it's one throat to choke. So we said, look, ours is much higher performing, much lower cost. Any problem, we take ownership. That's it. And then let's say we realize it's a router issue. It has nothing to do with us. It's a compute issue. We fix it. We go back to the guy and say, here, by the way, here was the problem. Next, just so you know, you should talk to Cisco. And they're like, whoa, because if we didn't do that, they don't want to be in the middle of, and a lot of companies did this wrong that we competed with. Their first thing was prove to them it's not our problem. That's like dealing with the cable company.
Right.
It attracts a certain type of person to want to be in an organization that they could be proud of the rest of their lives. Warren Buffett came to Notre Dame for me, and he gave a talk, which was a sensational talk. And it was during WorldCom and Enron and all that kind of stuff. I endowed the business school at Notre Dame, and I asked the business dean, what are you going to do to make this special? And she said, we're going to build a business school culture around the values of Notre Dame, to do the right things because it's the right thing to do. Yeah, that was in 2000, 2006, the first time they ever, Business Week evaluated undergraduate business problems. It was ranked third, seventh, and first 6 times in a row. Best undergraduate school in business. And what they asked was, what did you think of the value of the education? What did they ask employers? What did you think of the people who come out of here? And they asked, what was your thing you enjoyed the most about this? And the pride they took the most in was the culture. It fit who they believed they were as people. So when I think about business, that's what we wanted to accomplish. We wanted to build a company where our customer, I went on a call one time, I'll never forget, and the guy had a big Sun Micro plaque up. This is back in the 90s. And he says, their president gave me, it's like, they're our number one vendor. And my salesman got so pissed off. He's like, I can't believe he threw that in your face. I said, our goal is to have him throw our plaque in somebody else's face. But they did a great job. I'm not offended. That's awesome that they did such a good job for this guy's company that he wants to put their plaque. We got to go earn that. And, to this day, as you probably well know, people stayed at NetApp a very long time, many people. And they went on to create many companies. Palo Alto has a bunch of NetApp execs. A lot of great companies they've gone on to perform other places. And I love all that stuff. I love the fact they left and went and did something and they created a culture that's similar. As I said, I'm very aware you can make a lot of money and treat people poorly. You can make a lot of money and not care at all about people. That's just not the values of my life, and that's not what I wanted. And it's not the value of the people who came to NetApp. And I think if you truly find a company like that and you fit your personality, it doesn't feel like work. We created a benefit, Damon, and it was done around 2000, where every single employee gets 1 week's vacation on top of whatever they normally get if they'll work for a charity. No questions asked about what it is. People come forward and say, can we support the Heart Walk? Can we support all these great charities? We're like, we don't want to be in these discussions all the time. Let them do whatever they want to do. We already support stuff. But so you come in and you go, this guy, Dave Botterill from Canada, said, he really took a passion for Haiti. So after one of the earthquakes. And he started with Habitat for Humanity and things like that. And they went down. He's still doing it to this day. Probably 20 years later, he's still helping the people of Haiti. These villages have things they never would have had from an education point of view. And a number of other employees went with him. They just used that time, that week off, it's paid vacation, to go do something good. We don't define what it is. Just go do something good. And when I used to ask people, just write it up. I would love to have a book of these. To just say, these are the things where we've helped the planet. Hire good people and do good things.
That would be a great book. You should do that. We have a lot of senior leaders who listen to our podcast here, and they say they might be thinking to themselves, okay, well, this is easy for her to navigate the cultural changes and cultural differences because it's not just Hong Kong. You've been over several countries. What practical advice or tips do you have somebody who's maybe taking a job abroad or going somewhere else, and they're going to have to learn how to navigate cultures? Because I have a good friend who used to work here, and she managed teams across France, Italy, and in other parts of the world. And she's like, Damon, it is completely different. You have to do things much differently. What advice do you have somebody like that, who I'm thinking about, who's jumping into a role like this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the very important is to what I normally do. What I normally do is I talk to somebody in the office, because when you know where you're going, there are a lot of preparations. You're connected with somebody from HR who will help you with the transition. So you start asking questions. So what is the culture? I mean, how do you show people that you appreciate them? What do you shake hands? How do you approach them? I mean, are they? Do you have to? What is the common thing? What is the practice or the market? How do people greet each other? What is considered bad? What is considered rude? Because you don't know, right? So these are very important things. What is considered rude? Because you might do something that is rude for people, but you don't know because it's not rude for you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So these are the first things I would do. And then this is even before I have arrived in the country, right? So I would talk to as many people as possible just to understand their experience. And I would try and talk to different nationalities, because different nationalities see the world in a different way, because they were raised up in different way. So that's the goal. Get as many diverse feedback you can. And then the first, when you arrive, go by the rules and start making connections with people, start talking to people. And then it's very important to talk to colleagues of what is appropriate and what is, because some of the Asian, in Asia, people are a bit more shy. There is no such culture of speaking up and being loud, etc. So you have to learn how to deal with that, and to know that if nobody speaks in the meeting, you have to probably do something else. Ask them for an opinion, or ask them to write an opinion for you, because they might not be okay to speak. So yeah, these are the. You just have to learn the first month of being somewhere. You have to really learn, absorb, ask questions, not only about the business but also about how things are done. What is the right way to work with people?
I think that's great, because what I see a lot of times with people, sometimes people I coach or mentor, they move into these new companies or they get promoted into different positions or different areas, and they immediately think it's their responsibility to change everything right off the bat. And I tell them that's the wrong way to go. What you it sounds like you're doing, Annie, again, is you're starting off and you're making connections. You're going around, you're talking to people, you want to understand what's maybe working well, kind of get them on your side, instead of being that new boss who comes in who just says, we're going to do it my way, or like I call them the know-it-all bosses, right? And so you're, again, just being curious. Can you dig a little deeper on that? Because I think that is so important. And I want to emphasize this to our listeners, because that's a big mistake. And a lot of times when you do that, you never gain the trust and the motivation of the people you're leading if you just go in and push everything aside.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, when you go in, you know nothing about the place. Yeah, you know the numbers and you know what are the products and how it is doing, etc. But you don't know the internal politics, shall I call it, or internal relationships and balance, and who works with whom, etc. Who is perceived how. And the first month, that's always what I do. I just go deeper into and only listen, because in order to change anything, you first of all have to see, is there a problem? What is the problem? Who says this is a problem? And if you have to change, what is the goal, right? It's not for the sake of change. You don't need to prove yourself the first week. I think you can prove yourself by helping, rather than saying, oh, you have to change. No, help them. I think that the thing that always works with me, and many people have said that, is that I'm trying to find the connection between, it's like a universe, and this is you, and there are different departments. So what are these departments doing? What is the input and output? Who are the other people that you depend on? And what are the people that are dependent on you? And by knowing these connections, interconnections, you start building a picture. And by the end of the second month, your goal should be, they say 30, 60, 90 days in a new job. By the end of the second month, you should have an idea of how is this place run, what can potentially be an issue, and then make some kind of a plan or suggestion, or, to your boss and to the executive committee, and throw some ideas and see how they are perceived. Because going aggressively and arrogantly is not going to help at all. Yeah, you might do some changes, but that's not guaranteed. This will be the changes that need to be done.
So that leads me to my next question. So let's say you're 2 months into it, right? And you see that there's some specific changes that you really think need to be made. And for the first 60 days, you're kind of sitting on your hands, for lack of a better term, because you don't want to jump in and make the changes, but you see that these need to be made. You go to your boss. Have you ever gone to your boss, you present them, and they say, no, that's not gonna happen. So how did you handle that situation? And maybe share the story if you can.
Um, how do I've never had like a outright no.
Or
It's
not
always,
yet.
yeah, not yet, not now. And how do I handle this situation? Well, you have to find a way through it. And if there is, maybe you didn't give enough ammunition, enough data, enough information that shows that this has to change, right? Then you can go and collect more, or you continue to observe the situation, because if you think something is wrong and needs to change, then obviously, if they say no, that doesn't mean that should go off your radar. No, you just continue monitoring it, and then every so often raise it in a conversation and say, by the way, that continues to persist, etc. It's good to be, if you have really something that is a real concern, you have to raise it potentially at a meeting, so it's documented somewhere that was discussed. In the corporate world, that's very important. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't set people off, because then there will be unnecessary pushback.
Yeah, you can't be
to that.
childish. You can't be childish with it.
Yeah,
I mean, we've
yeah.
all had situations where you think you have a great idea, you come and either you're told no or maybe not now. And I think it's really the way you handle it. And sometimes you have to self-reflect yourself. Well, maybe I didn't do a good enough job presenting it. Maybe I didn't create enough sense of urgency. So instead of playing the victim or saying, oh, I put in so much hard work with this, blah, 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 feel sorry for me. It's like, look in the mirror. Maybe there's something you could do differently. And you just got to get on board, because because there's a lot of people looking at you as their leader to see how they should be responding to things like that too. And just keep coming back to the table.
Yeah, being childish about it, that didn't even cross my mind. I mean, that's not a behavior that a senior leader should have, right? And being a victim. I mean, this is something that, I mean, when you said it, I realized this didn't even cross my mind. So that's basically how a leader should be, There is no such thing. I mean, childish. You're sitting there and you're responsible for people, you're responsible for operations, for processes, for revenue. You can't just be a victim. If you're a victim, imagine what is going to happen with the people that report to you. That will have an impact on the culture, etc. So it's always, as a senior leader, you have to lead by example. So if you want people to be honest, transparent, share with you what the real issue is, you have to be that. So you have to be open, transparent, and share what the real issue is. There is always a way to share even the most negative news. You cannot hide it.
You cannot
and
hide
that's
it.
what you cannot hide it, because it will come out, and it will come out from another source, and that is going to hurt the whole
People won't trust
department.
you. They're not gonna trust you.
You will lose trust like this. It's just gone. And you could have sat there and said it in a way that people would understand it. You always find a way to do that. So that's what I learned from my boss, who was the CEO. He was the most open and transparent boss I've ever had.
And probably humble too.
Yeah, very humble. And you always knew where are you with him. You always knew. You didn't need to guess. And this is one of the most important things that I always advise people to be. Because when you're at senior position, people think, oh, I cannot be vulnerable. I cannot be open because others are going to use it against me. But it's not true. You can be open and vulnerable, and that's enough for the other people. Not, I mean, they can do whatever. I mean, they can speak, they can blame you, point fingers. But if you continue to be open, call their lies in a very professional manner, that's what you have to do. You just can't. Behaviors like victim or egotistic, or you're not there for yourself. You're there for the team.
You're there for your
The
team.
team has to succeed.
And here's for all our listeners out here, the reason why Annie got to where she got is because of what she's talking about, because she's not a victim, because she was transparent and she's accountable. Because I see so many people out there that, come to me who want to be promoted, or they think they should be promoted, and all they do is blame somebody else, blame other people. That's why you're stuck at the level you are, because you're not owning up to things. And it takes a special type of talent that we all can do, right? We all have it in us, but Annie, that's why you've gotten to where you're at, which is incredible.
One question I have for you, Blaine, that I hear quite a bit, in conversation with customers, is in going back to Gen Z. It's now in the workforce, we have up to like 5 different generations of employees now, and everybody has kind of a different approach. How do you recommend going about managing across these different generations?
That's a great question.
Trick question. Yeah.
And honestly, God, it's a challenge, David. I really think it is. That's why I kind of come back to what's the for the sake of what, that's my language for it. For the sake of what are you here? And going beyond just the surface, and that will break through generational sensibilities, if you will. What do you get to have, do, or be that you wouldn't get to have, do, or be if you were working for another company? What do you get to have, do, or be that is unique to your participating with us here? And then how can I go about making sure that you have access to that to the degree that it's possible for me to make that happen? Gallup's notion of emotional engagement, there's 7 questions, or 12 questions, whatever it is. One of them is, do you get to do what you do best in the work environment? I'm butchering that question, but essentially they're looking at, do you get to do something that actually brings life to what you're doing? Yeah. And that is not generationally sequestered. That's going to be true across all generations. Kind of what brings me alive? What brings me alive? What do I get connected to?
You feel like a great unifier in your thinking. What are those things that bring us together and the things that we miss sometimes, like compassion? And that brings me actually to the next thing I wanted to mention, is because I almost feel like we can't have a conversation without going right to the soul of business. I mean, you get down to that level of understanding and language. That's that level you're operating. And when you say soul, you mean something very specific that's really more about like aliveness.
Yeah. Every business I've ever worked with, whether it's an enormous multinational like Nokia, I led their global leadership initiative for about 12 years, or a small mom and pop, and I say mom and pop, kind of a startup sort of a situation, or they were all founded on an idea. This germ of something that I wanted to bring to life, and the founders were usually pretty passionate. I mean, they couldn't wait to get back to work. Sometimes they just slip a pizza under the door and I'll just keep going, sort of a thing. And they didn't get burned out. Burnout does not happen as a consequence of working hard. Burnout happens as a consequence of being divorced from meaning. And where soul comes into play is it's what's meaningful about what we do, keeping that lit. Keeping people connected to what's meaningful about what we do in our service or our product. And this kind of goes back to the notion of, for me, what's the purpose of a business?
Yeah.
The purpose of a business is not to make money, with a tip of the hat to Milton Friedman here. I mean, that's not what the purpose of a business is. You need to have money to be in business, but the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet for anybody that comes in contact with my service or product. That's the purpose of business. And if people walk away from what I'm doing feeling, whoa, that was cool, they're going to keep coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is a unique differentiator that kind of sets me apart from others that are, playing in the same ballpark that I'm playing in.
Yeah. I have to say, there's some, I didn't want to talk about this because you mentioned it specifically, it's your bow wake. Is like a person's is about a person's sort of individual communication style, and it's more than just the words you use, because when you speak, I have this huge sense of hopefulness and like things are possible. Which is, I think it would be great for you to talk about how people can find that on their own. But the reason I mention it is because you're so compelling when you talk about this stuff. A lot of people say these words, but it doesn't feel real. And it feels to me like, how do you get a business where these words aren't just phony, but they really get down to an actual level? No, there really is a soul, and we really mean it.
Somebody's got to care. I mean, it's as simple as that. If they're doing greenwashing by saying, we've got social impact and that sort of stuff, people are going to see through that right away. They really are. But when people, when somebody, and this is, the whole leadership notion, when somebody taps into the idea that there's a possibility here, that when I think about that possibility, I get chills. When I think about that possibility, I sit up straight in my chair. When I think about that possibility, I can't imagine that we aren't already there yet.
Yeah.
That kind of an energetic, if you've landed into that as a leader, and this is where that notion of a bow wake happens. I mean, you move through your organization, and that energy actually gets in the room before you do. And people are going, their heads are up and they're starting to pay attention. I mean, colloquially, Steve Jobs was famous for this. They called it his reality distortion field. And people would walk away going, God, I don't know what that was about, but I believe that we can do this. And somebody, would say, well, you got caught in Steve's reality distortion field. And it was a real thing. Yeah. He built $1 trillion company. I mean, Steve, it's not Steve, Tim Cook actually did a large, heavy lift on that. But Jobs actually put in place a lot of stuff that is today being leveraged through the use of a reality distortion field. This is how you don't commit to something out there. This idea that's not out there. I don't commit to it. I become the commitment. I am a commitment.
Yeah.
I'm not committed to it. I am the commitment. And leadership is largely symbolic. So I become the symbol of what it is that I say is important.
Yeah.
Omar, let's talk about building great teams. Yeah. Why is it so important to have a diverse team?
Sure. I think a couple of things. I think the first one is obviously like it's the right thing to do. So before you talk about any, let's say, benefits, how it may help the business, the organization, customers, whatever else, I think it's fundamentally first the right thing to do. I think the other part of it is, any organization, we're obviously serving a diverse base of customers, no matter what business that you're in. And so for me, if you're working backwards from really the customers that you're serving, if you don't have like good internal representation of your base, it's likely that things that you will develop, whether it's products, software, whatever it may be, are less likely to have the intended impact once you roll them out, if you haven't considered really all of the your customer base that is out there. So I think that's one. So for example, if you're if you're making a decision about building a new service, for example, and let's say all your team is, for example, male or female or whatever other indicator of diversity that you want to use, it's less likely that you'll probably make some right decisions that benefit all the different cohort groups if you don't have that representation internally. that's one. I think the second one is, we were talking earlier about decision making, and I feel like that's where, you know, inclusion and diversity plays such a key role, because no matter how much we think we're, let's say, unbiased, we are biased in that respect, whether it's things like, you know, confirmation bias, anchoring bias, any kind of bias you throw out there. And I feel like the only true antidote to biases is really getting these diverse opinions. But again, I think that getting those diverse opinions is one thing. How you actually include them in the decision making is, in my mind, like the part you really need to get right, because otherwise, again, you may get these opinions, but if they're not factoring into the decision that you're making, you're not going to get the impact that you see. But I feel like decision making is definitely one where it plays a key role. And these decisions could be anything from decisions you're making about internally about your talent, for example, who you're promoting, or performance assessment of somebody, or these could be external facing decisions that you're making about products you're launching, features that you're designing, etc.
When it comes to, diversity is kind of what I think everything really comes down to, because if you have a diverse team, then you have more potential as a team.
Yeah.
But it's not automatically easy to mine that potential, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you sort of make that work for you? And I think that people get confused a little bit about how to put it into practice. Like, diversity doesn't mean, for example, I'm just going to take a little piece of everybody's idea to make my decision, because that may not be the best decision. Diversity also means, like, how do I make it safe enough for people to really, like, offer their opinion, instead of just like create a sort of a groupthink thing where we all must have the same idea, so we're good. How can I make it safe, but at the same time also, like, have an honest debate about ideas? It's like, how do you put diversity on a team into practice so that you get the full results and the full potential of that team?
No, definitely. And I think it takes, like, a lot of this is also like what you do day to day, and even in very small actions that end up having a big impact in that respect, right? Simple things like, for example, you may be in a meeting where you have people, let's say, in person, and then some people attending virtually. And then how inclusive is the conversation? Is it like the people that are in the room are dominating the conversation? Are we even asking for inputs from the folks on the call, or on the video, or on the phone, or are they able to provide inputs into the conversation? Like, just maybe one small thing. I think being cognizant of different working styles or personalities in terms of how they express themselves, what level of comfort do they have in terms of stepping into conversations and things of that nature. So I think, again, recognizing like these things, and sometimes they're small, but they add up in that respect. And then how do you incorporate them into what you're doing? So, for example, let's say you're in the meeting, and maybe we open it up with people that are on the call providing inputs. We assign somebody who's looking at the raised hand queue and stopping the conversation when they see, some hands go up, to make sure that we're able to incorporate their inputs there. Making sure that if you're making a hiring decision, you have a diverse panel that's evaluating the candidates. So again, it's like, how do you weave in to, like, inspect every activity that you're doing, and just be mindful of, like, how are we being intentional about bringing both the diversity and the inclusion element to it there. And again, all these things add up as you do that. And I think this is also where, as leaders, it's also great to learn what other leaders are doing, what other teams have found success in, because I feel like no matter how good you think you're doing in that area, there's always more that we can do. And I feel like taking learnings and what's worked in other teams is also a great way to learn and incubate kind of ideas that are validated to work in some contexts.
Yeah.